At my son's funeral, his wife looked me dead in the eye, pointed her manicured finger straight at my chest in front of dozens of grieving guests, and whispered without a trace of shame, "Stop crying. Pack your bags and get out of my house right now." She called me a worthless burden, a penniless parasite living off her husband's hard work. But here is what Sienna didn't know. The grand, timber-framed craftsman house she was kicking me out of, I bought the dirt and built it with my own hands back in 1991. The $200, Zoo's own life insurance policy she thought was hers to spend, was locked in a trust she couldn't touch. And for 6 years she had been living off my quiet generosity while treating me like a charity case. Instead of shouting, instead of creating a scene over my child's casket, I just nodded and walked away. Because in my 67 years on this earth, I've learned one absolute truth. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is just the calm before an absolute storm. Welcome to Dad's Ultimate Payback. If you believe that respect isn't something you inherit, but something you earn, hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from tonight. And trust me, stay until the very end. Because what Sienna discovered 3 days later taught both of us that making arrogant assumptions will cost you everything you own. Let me start from the very beginning, because if you don't understand where I came from, you won't understand why I handled things the way I did. My name is Arthur Vance. I'm 67 years old, a retired senior tax auditor for the Internal Revenue Service. For 35 years, my job was simple: dig through mountains of paperwork, verify every single claim, follow the money, and separate facts from fancy lies. People lie all the time. Numbers, contracts, and recorded deeds never do. I've lived a quiet, simple life in Naperville, Illinois, a leafy, upscale suburb just outside Chicago. I drive a 12-year-old Subaru Outback with a dented rear bumper. I wear flannel shirts, buy my groceries with coupons, and keep my mouth shut. 3 years ago, I lost my beloved wife, Margaret, after a quiet battle with cancer. 2 months ago, the unthinkable happened. My only child, my 32-year-old son, Gregory, was killed instantly when a semi-truck jackknifed across Interstate 88 on a rainy Thursday night. When you lose your wife, you feel like half of your past has been erased. But when you bury your child, your future is wiped out in a single second. I was devastated, numb, barely able to tie my shoes. And that was the exact moment my daughter-in-law, Sienna, decided to take full control of the narrative. Gregory had been married to Sienna for 6 years. Sienna was a high-end real estate broker working out of a flashy boutique agency in downtown Naperville. She was 30 years old, obsessed with status, and wore $400 designer dresses while driving an Audi A6 she could barely afford the lease payments on. To Sienna, human worth wasn't measured by integrity, kindness, or character. It was measured by square footage, brand names, and how many followers liked her Instagram posts. From the second the police officer delivered the tragic news at our front door, Sienna immediately pushed me into the background. "Don't worry about a thing, Arthur," she told me with a tight, artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll handle all the arrangements. You just sit there and rest." What she really meant was, stay out of my way. At the funeral home, Sienna turned my son's tragedy into a corporate networking event. She made every single decision without consulting me once. She picked a glaringly expensive silver casket, extravagant floral arrangements that looked like a parade float, and hired a string quartet. When I quietly suggested playing Gregory's favorite acoustic song, the song he used to play on his guitar out on our back porch when he was learning to build this house with me in the summer of 1991, Sienna cut me off cold. "That's embarrassingly rustic." "Arthur," she snapped, adjusting her oversized dark sunglasses inside the air-conditioned parlor. "We're hosting prominent real estate clients and city developers today. We need something sophisticated and uplifting, not some depressing campfire tune. Let me handle the image." I watched her command the room in her tailored black Gucci dress, shaking hands, wiping away dry, delicate tears for the cameras, and accepting condolences like she was the star of a tragic theatrical production. And me? I sat in the corner wearing my old gray Sunday suit, the exact same suit I'd worn to my wife Margaret's funeral 3 years earlier. I felt completely invisible. I was a father drowning in suffocating grief, but to Sienna, I was just a piece of outdated furniture that ruined the aesthetic of her high society grieving widow routine. The true nightmare began during the post-funeral reception held at the house. My house, technically, though Sienna had been parading around it as if she were the queen of the manor ever since Gregory's death. Around 4 in the afternoon, while dozens of guests, neighbors, and local business owners were milling around the living room holding wine glasses, Sienna caught my elbow and dragged me into the kitchen. She shut the heavy swinging door, cutting off the low murmur of the crowd, and turned to face me with a thick manila folder tucked under her arm. "Arthur, we need to address your situation right now," she whispered, her voice sharp and devoid of any sympathy. "My situation?" I asked softly, setting my untouched cup of black coffee on the counter. Let's not play dumb, Sienna hissed, opening the folder and pulling out a sheet of paper covered in her neat handwriting. You're entirely dependent on this household now. Gregory was supporting you financially, covering your food, your roof, and your medical expenses. Now that he's gone, I simply cannot carry that kind of financial dead weight. You are a burden I can't afford. Burden. The word landed like a physical blow to my chest. I've been more than generous letting you stay in the guest wing these past few years, she continued, pointing her French manicured fingernail at the paper. But this house belongs to me now. Everything Gregory owned belongs to me. He left it all to his wife, as he should. I need this property cleared so I can renovate it and put it on the market. She pulled out a set of glossy brochures and shoved them against my chest. I've done you a favor and looked into senior housing. Shady Pines Senior Living has a studio opening up next month. It's $950 a month. That should swallow up most of your meager Social Security check, and you can apply for government food stamps for the rest. I'm giving you exactly 30 days to pack your bags and move out. Circle November 15th on your calendar. That's your eviction date. I stared at her, utterly speechless. She thought I was living off my son's salary. She thought my simple flannels, my 12-year-old Subaru, and my quiet lifestyle meant I was a penniless old man relying on family charity. She had built an entire fantasy world in her head based purely on surface appearances. To make matters infinitely worse, Sienna walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up a cardboard box, and began tossing things inside. I looked down and felt my blood run ice cold. Inside the box were framed photographs of my late wife, Margaret. Pictures of our wedding in 1978, photos of Margaret holding Gregory as a newborn, and even Gregory's childhood science fair ribbons. What are you doing with Margaret's pictures? I managed to ask, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. I'm redecorating, Sienna said callously, tossing a framed portrait of Margaret straight into the trash can near the sink, shattering the glass with a loud crack. This place looks like an outdated museum. Gregory always said this house needed a modern touch. I'm clearing out the clutter before the contractor arrives on Monday. I looked at the shattered glass in the trash. I looked at my late wife's face smiling up through the debris. Something fundamental inside my chest shifted. The crushing, paralyzing grief that had kept me slumped over for 2 months evaporated, replaced instantly by an icy, crystal-clear resolve. Sienna saw me stare at the box and mistook my silence for total defeat. She smirked, feeling completely victorious. Don't look at me like that, Arthur. Reality hurts. You have 30 days, November 15th. Be gone, or I'll have the county sheriff haul your things out to the curb. I didn't yell. I didn't reach into the trash to grab the frame. I didn't raise my voice or throw a fit in front of the 40 guests standing out in the living room. I just looked at my daughter-in-law, nodded very slowly, and said 2 quiet words, "Understood, Sienna." She smiled, deeply satisfied, thinking she had just intimidated a helpless old man into submission. What Sienna failed to realize was that she was talking to a retired IRS auditor. She didn't know about the locked steel filing cabinet sitting in the dark corner of my basement. She didn't know about 33 years of meticulous tax receipts, title deeds, and property records. And above all, she had no idea about the $1.15 million trust fund that actually paid for the very shirt on her dead husband's back. She thought she held all the cards. She was about to learn that assumptions are the most expensive mistake a person can ever make. For the next 48 hours following the funeral, I became a phantom in my own home. I kept my distance, retreating to the small study at the back of the house while Sienna transformed the main living spaces into her personal staging ground. She moved through the rooms with a frantic, triumphant energy, as if Gregory's passing had unlocked the doors to a grand kingdom she had been waiting years to rule. On Thursday afternoon, the loud clack of high heels echoed across the oak floorboards. Sienna had brought 3 of her boutique real estate colleagues over to tour the property. From my study window, I watched them step out onto the back patio, sipping expensive iced lattes and pointing at the yard like speculators inspecting a foreclosed lot. The structure has incredible potential, girls, Sienna's voice carried clearly through the open window, dripping with artificial authority. The layout is a bit dated, very 90s, but once I gut the kitchen and tear down this rustic stone fireplace, it'll easily appraise for $580,000 the Naperville market. My late husband left me a gold mine. It's gorgeous, Sienna. One of the agents chimed in, tossing her blonde hair back. But what about your father-in-law? Isn't he still living here? Sienna let out a sharp, dismissive laugh that made my stomach turn. Arthur? Oh, please. The poor old man is practically senile. He's completely clueless when it comes to financial management. Gregory was bankrolling his entire life, paying his taxes, buying his groceries, keeping a roof over his head. I've already given him his 30-day notice. He's moving into a state-subsidized senior facility next month. It's better for everyone. He's just a helpless dead weight at this point. I watched our next-door neighbor, Helen Davis, standing near her flower bed just across the property line. Helen had lived next door to Margaret and me for 34 years. She had watched us break ground on this very lot in 1991. She saw the concrete trucks pour the foundation and watched me spend my weekends putting up the roof rafters alongside my 12-year-old boy. When Helen heard Sienna's loud, casual disrespect, she shot a pained, deeply sympathetic look toward my window. She believed Sienna's narrative too. After all, why wouldn't she? People only see what they expect to see. Sienna saw an old man driving a 12-year-old Subaru Outback with a dented bumper. She saw plain flannel shirts, clipping coupons from the Sunday paper, and 2 years of quiet, solitary grief following my wife's passing. To a woman whose entire worldview was built on luxury car leases, designer handbags, and credit card debt, my humility looked like helplessness. My silence looked like submission. My frugal lifestyle looked like desperate poverty. What Sienna mistook for poverty was actually peace, and what she mistook for weakness was 35 years of trained, methodical IRS discipline. She was living in a paper palace, built entirely on her own arrogant assumptions, and she had no idea that the man she was calling a helpless dead weight held the key to her total ruin. When darkness fell over Naperville and the house went completely silent, I waited until I heard Sienna's bedroom door click shut upstairs. At 11:30 p.m., I stepped out of my study, walked down the carpeted hallway, and opened the heavy wooden door leading down to the basement. The basement had always been my sanctuary. While Margaret spent her afternoons gardening upstairs, I spent my quiet hours down here. It was cool, dry, and smelled faintly of aged cedar and fresh concrete. Sitting in the far corner, bolted directly into the concrete floor, stood a heavy, industrial steel filing cabinet, a 4-drawer gray beast made by the On Company, secured with a heavy brass master lock. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the brass key I had carried on my ring for 4 decades, and unlocked the top latch. The drawer slid open with a smooth, metallic hum. Inside were thousands of documents sorted by year, category, and transaction ID, filed with the razor-sharp precision of a senior IRS tax auditor who had spent his career dissecting multi-million-dollar corporate tax fraud. I didn't need to guess. I didn't need to speculate. Everything in my life was backed by ironclad paper trails. I pulled out the very first folder from 1991, labeled 447 Maple Street, Land and Consquection. I laid the first document flat on my workbench under the bright fluorescent light. It was the original warranty deed, recorded with the DuPage County Recorder of Deeds on April 12, 1991. The legal buyer listed on the deed wasn't Gregory Vance. It wasn't a joint ownership or a family partnership. The name typed in bold black ink was Arthur Vance, sole owner. Attached to the deed was the cashier's check receipt from First National Bank, $52,000 paid in full for the land, followed by $110,000 in wire transfers paying off the custom home builders in full. No mortgage, no cosigners, no bank loans. I had paid cash for every single brick, timber, and nail. Sienna was planning to gut a $580,000 house she believed she inherited, entirely ignorant of the fact that her dead husband's name didn't appear on a single property title document in the county courthouse. I pulled out the second thick binder. 33 years of property tax assessments and utility liens, bodge after page, year after year, from 1991 to the present quarter of 2026. Every single property tax bill issued by the city of Naperville, totaling over $12,000 annually, was addressed exclusively to Arthur Vance. Attached to every bill was a canceled check drawn directly from my personal checking account. Electric bills, water bills, homeowners insurance policies, roof repair contracts, all in my name, all paid by my hand. Gregory had lived here his whole life as my son, but he had never owned a single square inch of the floorboards Sienna was currently pacing on. Then, I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out the thickest, most critical folder of them all, bound in black leather and stamped with gold lettering. The Vance Family Trust, Private Estate Records. This was the financial fortress Sienna knew nothing about. In 1988, long before Gregory went to college, long before he ever met Sienna at a downtown Chicago lounge, Margaret and I established the Vance Family Trust. As a tax auditor, I knew how brutal probate courts, estate taxes, and predatory lawsuits could be. I systematically poured my savings, my smart government bond investments, and my commercial real estate returns into that trust for 38 years. I opened the latest quarterly statement from Northern Trust Bank, dated July 31st, 2026. The total account balance sat at $1,150,428.8. The truth about my son's wealthy, successful lifestyle was contained right here in these ledger pages. Sienna believed Gregory was a high-flying software engineer who supported his poor old father. The reality was the exact opposite. When Gregory wanted to attend Northwestern University, his tuition wasn't paid by student loans. It was paid by a $45.00 annual distribution from the Vance Family Trust. When Gregory got married 6 years ago, the $60,000 wedding reception at the downtown Chicago hotel was funded by a check written from this very trust. When Gregory wanted to buy his wife that brand new Audi A6 to help her real estate image, it was a trust distribution that covered the down payment. Gregory wasn't the benefactor of this house. He was a lifetime beneficiary of my generosity. I was the sole trustee. I held absolute power over the capital, the distributions, and the property. Gregory had lived comfortably because I made sure my boy lived comfortably, and because Gregory was a humble, grateful son who respected his family. He never felt the need to brag to his status-obsessed wife about where the money actually came from. He simply let her believe whatever made her feel secure. Sienna had seen the lifestyle I provided for my son and assumed he was the breadwinner. She saw my quiet, simple living after my wife died and assumed I was a helpless dependent. She had built an entire skyscraper of arrogance on a foundation of total delusion. I pulled out one final sheet of paper from the trust folder. Life Insurance Beneficiary Designation, Gregory Vance. Gregory's $200,000 life insurance policy through his employer wasn't payable to Sienna. 5 years ago, Gregory had officially updated his primary beneficiary to the Vance Family Trust, ensuring that if anything ever happened to him, the funds would go directly into the trust managed by me to care for his mother and me in our old age. Sienna was already spending that $200,000 in her head. She was already picking out new granite countertops, marble tiles, and planning luxury vacations to heal from her grief. She had no idea she was about to inherit exactly $0.00. I sat at my workbench in the quiet basement, holding 35 years of absolute truth in my hands. Sienna had given me 30 days to pack my bags. She had called me a dead weight, a burden, and a penniless parasite in front of my neighbors. She had thrown my late wife's framed portrait into the trash can like garbage. I closed the steel filing cabinet, turned the brass key in the lock until it clicked securely, and slid the key back into my pocket. 30 days? Sienna? I murmured into the quiet darkness of the basement. Let's see how far you dig this hole before I decide to fill it in. Friday morning brought a crisp autumn breeze through Naperville, but inside the Craftsman House on Maple Street, the air was suffocatingly dense. I was sitting at the heavy oak dining table, the very table Margaret and I had refinished together 3 decades ago, drinking my black coffee and reading the morning paper. The quiet scraping of my coffee mug against the wood was suddenly shattered by the sharp, metallic click of Sienna's designer heels marching down the hallway. She burst into the dining room carrying a crisp, white spiral notebook and a thick stack of printed documents. She was wearing a tailored burgundy suit, her blonde hair styled into a tight, professional bun, looking less like a grieving widow and more like an aggressive corporate auditor preparing to liquidate an insolvent business. Without asking for permission or offering a simple good morning, she pulled out a chair opposite me, tossed her heavy leather purse onto the table, and laid the papers flat between us. "Arthur, we need to finalize your financial inventory right now," Sienna announced, her tone clipping through the air with cold administrative efficiency. "I've spent the morning going over Gregory's bank accounts, and frankly, I need full transparency from you regarding whatever lingering debts or personal liabilities you have outstanding." I didn't lower my newspaper immediately. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, let the heat settle in my chest, and slowly folded the paper in half. "My debts, Sienna?" I asked, keeping my voice utterly level. "I don't recall asking you to manage my private affairs." Sienna let out an irritated theatrical sigh, rolling her eyes as if she were explaining basic arithmetic to a stubborn child. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Arthur, you're 67 years old, unemployed, and clearly living on a razor-thin fixed income. Gregory was absorbing your living expenses behind my back for years. Now that he's gone, I am the sole administrator of his estate. That means I need to clear out any financial landmines before I assume full ownership of the assets." She tapped her manicured fingernail sharply against a printed sheet titled Estate Asset Disprutienen and Legal Assumption. "Let's lay out the facts so there's no misunderstanding between us," Sienna continued, leaning forward with an air of absolute superiority. "When your wife died 3 years ago, Gregory inherited this entire property. That's how family succession works. As his surviving legal spouse, I automatically inherit 100% of his real estate holdings, including this $580,000 house, along with his $200,000 employer life insurance policy. Everything in this house, the land, the equity, the liquid capital, is legally mine now." I sat back in my chair, folding my hands neatly over my lap. "Is that what you believe, Sienna? That Gregory inherited this house when Margaret passed away?" "I don't believe it, Arthur. I know it," she snapped, a smug smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I am a licensed high-end real estate broker in the state of Illinois. I deal with property titles, probate transfers, and estate sales every single day. You don't need to try and play legal games with me to protect your pride. I know you have nothing. I know you were relying on my husband's charity. That's why I'm willing to be generous and handle your transition gracefully, provided you cooperate." She reached into her folder and pulled out a fresh, official-looking document stamped with red ink. She slid it across the polished oak table until it rested directly against my coffee cup. At the top of the page, in bold black capital letters, were the words, "Formal Norder to Vacate 30-day eviction order." "Consider this your official written notice," Sienna said, her voice dropping into an ice-cold, threatening register. "You have until 5 p.m. on November 15th to pack your personal clothing and vacate my premises. If you attempt to stay past that deadline, or if you cause any destruction to the property, I will not hesitate to call the DuPage County Sheriff's Office and have you forcibly removed for criminal trespassing. Am I making myself crystal clear?" I picked up the paper, looking over the legal template she had printed off the internet. It was a laughable, toothless piece of paper, an eviction notice issued by a tenant against the registered owner of the deed. But the sheer, unadulterated arrogance required to hand it to me in my own dining room was staggering. Before I could even offer a response, the heavy brass knocker on the front door clattered loudly against the wood. Sienna's face instantly lit up. "Ah, perfect. They're early," she muttered, bouncing up from her chair and smoothing down her suit jacket. She marched toward the foyer, leaving me sitting at the table with her ridiculous eviction paper. A moment later, Sienna led a group of 4 people into my living room. I recognized 2 of them immediately. They were senior listing agents from Gold Coast Luxury Properties, her boutique real estate firm in downtown Naperville. Behind them walked a man holding an iPad and a laser measuring tool, along with an interior designer carrying a heavy bag of countertop samples and color swatches. "Come on in, everyone," Sienna chimed, her voice morphing instantly into her high-pitched, fake enthusiastic sales persona. "Thank you so much for coming by on such short notice. As I mentioned on the phone, I'm taking full control of the property renovation before we launch the official listing next month." The group spilled into the living room, whispering among themselves and eyeing the custom architectural details. "Oh, Sienna, the square footage here is incredible," the designer said, running her hand along the solid oak trim. "Very solid bones, but honestly, the aesthetic is horribly dated. It feels like stepping into a 1990s time capsule. Tell me about it," Sienna scoffed loudly, standing right in the center of the room, completely ignoring my presence as I walked out of the dining room to observe them. The old man who lived here had zero taste. Total cabin fever style. "Look at this fireplace. This hand-laid river rock is completely hideous. It's dark, bulky, and ruins the open concept flow. I'm having the contractor sledgehammer the entire stone structure flat next week." My chest tightened slightly. I had built that fireplace with my own hands in the autumn of 1991. I remembered spending 3 freezing weekends wading through the local riverbeds with 12-year-old Gregory, picking out every smooth river stone together, mixing the mortar by hand, and setting those rocks one by one while Margaret served us hot cider from a thermos. "And what about the kitchen?" the lead real estate agent asked, peering through the doorway. "Oh, the kitchen is getting completely gutted," Sienna declared, marching into the space and slamming her hand down onto the custom Cherrywood Island counter. "These cabinets are an absolute eyesore. I'm ripping out all this dark wood, tearing down the pantry wall, and installing white quartz countertops with gold fixtures. We need this place looking like a modern Kardashian villa if we want to command top dollar. What about the elderly gentleman standing over there?" the contractor asked quietly, nodding his head toward me. "Does he need time to clear out his belongings before demo day?" Sienna turned around, looking at me with a cold, mock-pitying expression that made her colleagues chuckle softly. "Oh, don't worry about Arthur," she said dismissively, waving her hand as if I were a stray dog lingering in the alleyway. "He's just passing through. He's been served his formal eviction papers. He'll be safely packed up and tucked away in a budget senior facility long before the hammer starts swinging. He understands that he has no say in what happens to this estate." The agents nodded knowingly, exchanging subtle, condescending smirks. To them, I was just another sad, senile old man losing his home to the inevitable march of progress, a helpless footnote in Sienna's grand real estate flip. I stood in the doorway of my kitchen, watching these strangers measure my walls, dismiss my memories, and plan the destruction of the house I had bled to build. I looked at Sienna, standing on my floorboards in her expensive heels, drunk on the illusion of power, completely convinced that she had successfully bullied an old man into total submission. The deep, heavy sorrow that had weighed down my heart since Gregory's funeral didn't just fade. It hardened into an unbreakable diamond-sharp resolve. My 35 years of IRS auditor patience had reached its absolute end. I had given this woman every opportunity to show a shred of decency, a grain of humility, or a single moment of genuine respect for the family she had married into. Instead, she had shown only greed, cruelty, and unbridled arrogance. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout at her colleagues or throw them out of my house. Instead, I walked calmly back to the dining table, picked up my lukewarm cup of black coffee, and took a slow, quiet sip. I picked up the printed Nord vac hat, folded it neatly into thirds, and slid it calmly into my flannel shirt pocket. Sienna walked back into the dining room, her colleagues trailing behind her toward the front exit. She caught me folding the paper and smirked triumphantly. "I'm glad to see you're finally being realistic, Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. "Filing that paper away is the smartest thing you've done all week. It's time to accept reality. You can't afford this life anymore." I looked up at my daughter-in-law, meeting her gaze with an expression so deadpan, so utterly devoid of fear or distress, that her smug smile flickered for a fraction of a second. "You know, Sienna," I said softly, my voice carrying a quiet, terrifying weight that seemed to instantly chill the room. "In my 35 years auditing corporate tax fraud for the federal government, I learned a very valuable lesson about human nature." Sienna narrowed her eyes, folding her arms over her chest. "And what lesson is that?" "Arrogance built on a foundation of blind assumptions," I said quietly, offering her a faint, icy smile, "is the most ruinously expensive mistake a person can ever make. And trust me, my dear, you are about to pay the full price, down to the very last cent." Sienna stared at me, letting out a sharp, nervous laugh to cover the sudden knot of unease in her stomach. "Whatever you say, Arthur. Just make sure your bags are packed by November 15th. "Oh, don't worry, Sienna," I replied, standing up and tucking my chair neatly back under the table. "Everything is being taken care of, down to the finest detail." I watched her walk out the front door with her real estate entourage, her loud laughter echoing down the driveway. As the heavy wooden door clicked shut, sealing the house in peaceful silence once more, I pulled out my cell phone, opened my contacts, and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. The line rang twice before a sharp, professional female voice answered. "Vance and Collins Estate Law. This is attorney Eleanor Vance." "Eleanor," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet house like a steel blade. "It's Arthur. It's time to open the vault. We have an audit to perform." By 8 o'clock on Monday morning, I was sitting across the massive mahogany desk in the high-rise law office of Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was no relation to me, just a fortunate coincidence of names. But she had been my trusted estate planning attorney for over 20 years. She was a formidable woman in her late 50s, with sharp gray eyes, tailored suits, and a reputation in DuPage County for dismantling fraudulent property claims with terrifying efficiency. On the polished wood between us sat 3 thick leather binders containing every piece of evidence I had retrieved from my basement filing cabinet, along with the official corporate records of the Vance Family Trust. Eleanor adjusted her gold-rimmed reading glasses, flipping through the certified land titles, tax receipts, and trust distribution ledgers with methodical speed. As she read, a slow, icy smile spread across her face. "Arthur," Eleanor said, laying down a certified copy of the 1991 warranty deed, "this isn't just a misunderstanding on your daughter-in-law's part. This is monumental delusion. She has spent 2 months threatening to evict the sole registered property owner while attempting to liquidate an estate that she possesses 0 legal rights to. She handed me an eviction notice in my own dining room last Friday," I said quietly, leaning back in my chair. "She gave me until November 15th to pack my bags for a state-subsidized nursing home. She threw my late wife's photographs into the trash can and brought contractors into my house to measure my walls." Eleanor's eyes narrowed behind her lenses. "Then we aren't just going to send her a formal cease and desist letter, Arthur. We are going to execute a total legal and social foreclosure. I have already filed the official trust protection injunctions with the county court this morning. Gregory's employer has been served with the verified beneficiary documentation for the $200, zeros in life insurance policy. The payout is locked directly into your trust account as of 7 a.m. Now, how do you want to serve her notice?" I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Chicago skyline. She tried to humiliate me in front of my neighbors, her colleagues, and my late son's memory to make herself look powerful. She believes that because I live simply and keep quiet, I am helpless. I want her served where her arrogance lives. Eleanor closed the binders with a heavy thud. "Gold Coast Luxury Properties, 10 a.m. tomorrow." Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. sharp, the autumn sun was reflecting brightly off the glass facade of Gold Coast Luxury Properties, the premier boutique real estate agency situated on Main Street in downtown Naperville. The office was an opulent, open-concept showroom featuring marble floors, modern crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling glass conference rooms designed to project absolute wealth and prestige. When Eleanor Vance and I pushed open the heavy glass doors, the agency was buzzing with activity. Real estate brokers in expensive suits were talking on iPhones, administrative assistants were gliding between marble desks, and soft jazz played over the surround sound speakers. Right in the center of the showroom floor stood Sienna, She was commanding the room, wearing a striking emerald green designer suit and holding a laser pointer in front of a massive digital presentation screen. Standing beside her was Marcus Sterling, the managing broker and founder of Gold Coast Luxury Properties, along with a wealthy local developer couple who were preparing to sign an exclusive multi-million-dollar neighborhood listing contract. Sienna was in her absolute element, laughing gracefully, gesturing at property specs on the screen, and basking in the admiration of her boss and high-profile clients. And as you can see from our projected Q4 strategy, Sienna was saying, her voice echoing confidently across the quiet office, our portfolio is expanding rapidly. I am personally bringing a premier $500 Zuzo Historic Craftsman property in central Naperville to market next month, an estate I recently inherited that will set a new benchmark for luxury flips in the area. That property is not on the market, Sienna, I called out, my voice cutting through the polished showroom like a frostbite wind. And you don't own a single blade of grass on it. The entire office fell dead silent. The background jazz music seemed to instantly vanish. Sienna froze mid-sentence, her laser pointer wavering on the digital screen. She turned toward the entrance, her face instantly flushing with deep embarrassment as she saw me standing there in my plain flannel shirt, dark jeans, and sturdy work boots, flanked by Eleanor Vance carrying a heavy leather briefcase. Marcus Sterling, the managing broker, frowned and stepped forward, adjusting his tie. Sienna, who is this? Is there a problem here? Sienna tried desperately to recover her professional composure, offering her clients a tight, panicked laugh. Oh, I am so sorry, Marcus, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. This is my late husband's father, Arthur. He's been having a very difficult time processing his grief and adjusting to his new living situation since Gregory passed. Arthur, please, you can't be in here right now. We are in the middle of a high-level client presentation. I'll call your senior living shuttle to pick you up. Quiet down, Sienna, Eleanor Vance interrupted, stepping straight past the receptionist's desk with absolute terrifying authority. My name is Eleanor Vance, senior partner at Vance & Collins Estate Law. I am here representing Mr. Arthur Vance, the sole legal owner of 447 Maple Street, the sole trustee of the Vance Family Trust, and the exclusive beneficiary of Gregory Vance's estate holdings. The word lawyer acted like a grenade dropped onto the marble floor. The two VIP clients exchanged sharp, nervous glances and took a step back from the presentation screen. Marcus Sterling's eyes widened. Attorney Vance, what is the meaning of this? Sienna assured us that the Maple Street property was a clear-cut spousal inheritance undergoing probate liquidation. Sienna lied to you, Mr. Sterling, Eleanor stated calmly, pulling a thick stack of blue-bound legal documents from her briefcase and laying them flat on the central glass conference table in full view of every broker and client in the room. Or more accurately, she operated on breathtaking, predatory ignorance. And today, we are placing her entire fraudulent operation on official public record. Sienna's face drained of every drop of color. This is absurd. Marcus, don't listen to them. Arthur is a penniless dependent. He lived off my husband's charity for years. He doesn't own anything. Is that so? Eleanor replied smoothly, pulling out the first blue stamped document and holding it up so Marcus Sterling and the surrounding agents could see the official county seal. Exhibit A. The original warranty deed for 447 Maple Street, recorded April 12, 1991, with the DuPage County Recorder of Deeds. Purchased in full with cash by Arthur Vance. No mortgage, no co-signers, no secondary names. Gregory Vance never owned this house for a single day of his life, which means Sienna Vance inherited exactly 0% of this $580, 00 real estate asset. Marcus Sterling leaned over the glass table, snatched the deed, and scanned the text. His jaw visibly slackened. He looked at Sienna, his eyes filled with sudden furious disbelief. Sienna, your name isn't anywhere on this title. Gregory's name isn't even on this title. He paid the bills. Gregory paid the taxes. Sienna stammered hysterically, her polished veneer completely shattering into frantic terror. He supported Arthur. It's the same thing. Exhibit B, Eleanor continued relentlessly, dropping a massive 6-inch binder onto the glass with a loud crack. 33 consecutive years of property tax assessments, utility deeds, and municipal maintenance contracts, every single one issued to and paid directly by Arthur Vance from his personal private accounts. Gregory Vance lived on the property as a permitted family guest. Sienna gripped the edge of the display screen, her knuckles turning white as her colleagues began whispering intensely among themselves, pulling out their phones and staring at her like she was a stranger. And finally, Eleanor said, her voice ringing out like a judge's gavel across the showroom, Exhibit C, the official corporate records of the Vance Family Trust established in 1988 with a current liquid valuation of $1,150,420.88. Arthur Vance is the sole trustee and owner of this fund. Gregory Vance did not support his father. Arthur Vance quietly funded Gregory's Northwestern tuition, his wedding, his vehicle down payments, and his entire lifestyle through controlled trust distributions. Eleanor pulled out the final certified insurance document. Furthermore, the $200,000 employer life insurance policy Sienna Vance has been publicly claiming for the past 2 months has its primary beneficiary registered directly to the Vance Family Trust. The funds were locked into Arthur Vance's trust account 2 hours ago. Sienna Vance receives precisely $0.00. The entire Gold Coast Luxury Properties office went deathly quiet. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner overhead. The 2 VIP clients looked at Sienna with absolute disgust, closed their leather portfolios, and turned directly to Marcus Sterling. "Marcus," the husband said in a cold, hard voice, "we are pulling our listing from your agency immediately. If your senior brokers can't even perform a basic title search on the house they live in, we certainly aren't trusting you with a $3 million commercial contract." "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, please wait," Marcus pleaded, reaching out a hand. But the couple walked straight out the glass front doors without looking back. Marcus turned back to Sienna, his face turning dark purple with rage. "Sienna, step into my office right now. You are suspended indefinitely pending a full ethical review by our legal team." Sienna stood frozen in the center of the marble floor, her arms hanging limply at her sides, her emerald green suit looking ridiculous amidst the ruins of her fake empire. She looked at me, her eyes wide, terrified, and filled with a desperate, pathetic pleading I had never seen before. "Arthur," she choked out, tears finally breaking through her heavy mascara and running down her pale cheeks. "Arthur, please, I didn't know. Gregory never told me. I was just trying to secure my future. I took 2 steps forward." Standing tall in my flannel shirt, looking down at my daughter-in-law with the cold, unyielding precision of a retired IRS auditor closing an investigation. "You didn't know because you never cared to ask, Sienna," I said, my voice dangerously soft, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "You saw an old man driving a cheap car, wearing simple clothes and grieving his dead wife, and you assumed I was weak. You mistook my humility for poverty and my silence for submission." Eleanor reached into her briefcase, pulled out a white legal document stamped with a red sheriff's seal, and slid it directly into Sienna's trembling hands. "This is an official 30-day notice to vacate issued directly by the DuPage County Circuit Court," Eleanor announced. "You have until 5:00 p.m. on November 15th to remove your personal clothing and vacate Arthur Vance's premises. If you remain past that time, the DuPage County Sheriff will forcibly remove you for criminal trespassing, exactly as you threatened him in his dining room last Friday." Sienna looked at the eviction paper in her hands, the red ink burning into her eyes, and let out a broken, sobbing gasp. I looked at her one last time, buttoned my coat, and turned toward the exit. "Enjoy your 30 days, Sienna. Make sure your bags are packed." The heavy glass doors of Gold Coast Luxury Properties clicked shut behind Eleanor and me, sealing the chaos inside, but the shockwaves of what had transpired on that marble floor rippled across Naperville with terrifying speed. In the high-stakes, image-obsessed world of suburban luxury real estate, news doesn't just travel, it burns like dry timber in an autumn wind. By noon that very Tuesday, the story of Sienna Vance's catastrophic public exposure had swept through every high-end brokerage, title office, and coffee shop from downtown Naperville to the financial towers of Chicago. Inside the glass office of managing broker Marcus Sterling, the aftermath was swift and uncompromising. Marcus was a man who had spent 25 years cultivating an elite clientele, and having a senior listing agent publicly exposed for total legal ignorance and outright deception regarding a property she was actively trying to flip was a fatal blow to the firm's credibility. How could a woman who spent 6 years living in a house without knowing who owned the deed ever be trusted to draft a multi-million-dollar commercial contract? Within 45 minutes of our departure, Marcus officially terminated Sienna's independent contractor agreement with Gold Coast Luxury Properties. He didn't just suspend her, he revoked her access to the internal listing database, cleared out her desk into 3 cardboard boxes, and stripped her name from the agency's glossy billboard campaigns. The loss of Mr. and Mrs. Henderson's $3 million commercial account was the final nail in the coffin. Word spread among the local elite that Sienna was not only legally illiterate regarding her own family affairs, but that she possessed a chilling, predatory cruelty toward her grieving, widowed father-in-law. Clients who had signed listing agreements with her began calling the agency en masse, demanding that their contracts be transferred to other brokers or canceled altogether. By 3 p.m., Sienna was officially blacklisted across the entire DuPage County real estate market. Desperate, humiliated, and backed into a corner, Sienna tried to fight back the only way she knew how, through litigation. On Thursday morning, Eleanor Vance received a frantic phone call from a local low-tier probate attorney, whom Sienna had hired with the very last of her available credit card limit. The attorney attempted to posture, arguing that Sienna had a legitimate claim of marital occupancy and implied tenancy rights that entitled her to remain at 447 Maple Street for at least 6 months while she sorted out her personal affairs. Eleanor didn't even raise her voice. Sitting at her desk, she listened patiently to the attorney's speech before dropping a hammer of cold, hard financial reality onto the conversation. "Mr. Higgins," Eleanor said smoothly, her pen tapping rhythmically against her desk, "your client is a legal stranger to the title of 447 Maple Street. She has 0 equity rights, 0 spousal inheritance claims, and 0 legal standing. However, my client, Mr. Arthur Vance, is a fair man. If your client wishes to remain on the premises past her official 30-day eviction notice while she seeks alternative employment, my client is willing to draft a temporary, month-to-month residential lease agreement." Sienna's attorney paused, taking the bait. "A lease? What kind of terms are we talking about?" "Fair market rental value for a 2,800 square foot custom craftsman home in central Naperville," Eleanor replied flatly. "Rent is set at exactly $3,800 per month, due on the 1st of every month. Furthermore, given your client's recent job termination, total lack of verified income, and severe credit instability, my client requires a mandatory 2-month security deposit up front, along with the first month's rent paid in full via cashier's check before any lease is executed. That comes out to precisely $11,400 due immediately." The silence on the other end of the phone line was deafening. "$11,400s?" the attorney stammered. "She doesn't have $11,000. She doesn't even have $3,000. "Then I suggest she start packing her boxes, Mr. Higgins," Eleanor said, her tone hardening into pure ice. "Because at 5:01 p.m. on November 15th, the DuPage County Sheriff's Office will execute the formal eviction order. And if she sets foot on Arthur Vance's driveway after that moment, she will be arrested for criminal trespassing. Have a wonderful afternoon." The financial house of cards Sienna had built on her husband's memory dissolved completely over the next 7 days. Without the $2,500 monthly distributions Gregory used to quietly secure from my trust, without her real estate commissions, and with her credit cards maxed out from years of buying $400 designer suits, leasing an Audi A6 she couldn't afford, and maintaining a fake high society image, the avalanche arrived with devastating force. On Monday morning, a flatbed tow truck pulled up to the driveway of 447 Maple Street. 2 men from the vehicle repossession company stepped out, hooked up Sienna's sleek white Audi A6, and hoisted it onto the truck bed right in front of the neighbors. She had missed 3 consecutive lease payments, relying on the expected $200,000 life insurance payout to cover her debts, a payout that was now safely inside the Vance family trust. Sienna ran out onto the lawn in her slippers, screaming at the tow truck driver, tears streaming down her face, while our neighbor Helen Davis watched from her front porch, shaking her head in utter disdain. Sienna's social circle vanished overnight. The very real estate friends who had walked through my living room pointing at my hand-built fireplace and laughing at my plain flannel shirts stopped answering her phone calls. They blocked her on Instagram, canceled lunch dates, and pretended they had never met her. In the brutal economy of suburban status, a broke, unemployed woman who had tried to steal her dead husband's father's house was a social pariah. Nobody wanted to be associated with her toxic name. By the second week of November, as the trees along Maple Street shed their final golden leaves, Sienna was a completely broken woman. The high-pitched, arrogant voice that had once commanded my dining room and called me a helpless dead weight was gone, replaced by a hollow, terrified quiet. She spent her final days in the house moving quietly between the guest bedroom and the kitchen, living off cheap takeout, staring at her phone screen, and realizing that the elderly man sitting quietly in the back study was the only reason she had ever enjoyed a life of luxury in the first place. One evening, 4 days before her final eviction deadline, I walked into the kitchen to make a fresh pot of coffee. Sienna was sitting at the island counter, the very cherrywood counter she had planned to tear down with a sledgehammer, surrounded by empty cardboard packing boxes. Her hair was messy, tied back in a loose ponytail, her face pale and sunken without her heavy makeup. Wearing a plain gray sweatshirt, she looked up at me as I poured my coffee, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from hours of weeping. The arrogant, razor-sharp edge she had carried for 6 years was completely gone. In its place was a lost, terrified 30-year-old girl who had finally hit absolute rock bottom. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. I set my mug down on the counter and looked at her, keeping my expression entirely neutral, devoid of malice or triumph. "Yes, Sienna, I lost everything," she choked out, a fresh tear spilling over her eyelash and tracing down her cheek. "My job, the car, my reputation, my friends, everything is gone." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence settle between us for a long moment. "You didn't lose anything, Sienna," I said softly, my voice calm and unyielding. You threw it away. You built a life out of appearances, lies, and disrespect, and when the wind blew, your foundation turned to sand. Sienna buried her face in her trembling hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet, desperate sobs. I thought Gregory owned the house. I swear I thought he owned it. You assumed he owned it because it suited your pride, I replied, leaning gently against the counter. You never asked about the history of this family. You never cared to learn how this house was built, how Gregory was educated, or how your life was funded. You saw an old man driving an old car, and you decided he was worthless. You mistook my humility for poverty, Sienna, and you mistook my love for my son for weakness. She looked up at me through her tears, her voice cracking with a desperate, heartbreaking sincerity. If I had been different, Arthur? If I had treated you with respect from the beginning, would you have helped me? I looked down at my daughter-in-law, thinking of my late wife Margaret, thinking of my dead boy Gregory, and thinking of 35 years spent protecting the people I loved. Sienna, I said quietly, if you had been respectful, we wouldn't be standing in the ruins of your life tonight. I would have quietly supported you through your grief. I would have given you time to find your footing, paid your rent, and made sure my son's widow was cared for until the day I died. But respect is not a transaction you negotiate after you've been caught. It is the foundation of human decency, and when you chose to tear that foundation down, you chose this outcome for yourself. Sienna closed her eyes, letting out a long, shuddering breath, and slowly nodded her head. She had no arguments left, no legal threats, no arrogant speeches, just the cold, uncompromising reality of an audit she had failed completely. By November 15th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 full hours before the DuPage County Sheriff's deadline, a battered, rented moving van pulled up to the curb of 447 Maple Street. The bright autumn leaves had fallen completely, leaving the tall oaks along the driveway bare against a crisp, pale blue Illinois sky. I stood quietly near the front window of my study, holding my hot cup of coffee, watching the final chapter of a long, painful storm draw to its absolute close. Sienna stepped out of the passenger side of the truck. She was dressed in plain blue jeans, a faded navy sweater, and flat sneakers, a stark, almost unrecognizable contrast to the high-powered real estate broker who had marched through my house in a $400 designer suit just weeks ago. There were no flashy Audi A6 sedans waiting in the driveway, no entourage of boutique listing agents taking photos of my walls, and no loud, arrogant declarations echoing across the neighborhood. There was only the quiet, heavy crunch of gravel beneath her shoes as she walked up the stone walkway toward the front porch. She wasn't carrying suitcases or furniture. Those had already been packed into the back of the van by 2 hired movers. In her arms, she cradled a single medium-sized cardboard box. She stopped at the top step, right outside the heavy oak front door she had tried so desperately to claim as her own, and reached out her hand to ring the bell. I set my mug down on the study desk, walked slowly down the hallway, and pulled the door open. Sienna stood on the porch, shivering slightly in the chilly November wind. Her face was pale, stripped clean of makeup, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. But for the first time in 6 years, her posture was entirely devoid of pretense. She didn't look at me with anger, defiance, or legal posturing. She looked up at me with a profound, quiet exhaustion, the look of someone who had fought against the truth until she had completely run out of breath. "Arthur," she said, her voice soft and trembling against the cold air. "Sienna," I replied, keeping my tone calm, steady, and measured. She lowered her gaze to the cardboard box in her arms and extended it forward with trembling hands. "I was clearing out the final closet in the guest wing, and I found these hidden behind some old winter coats. I knew they didn't belong to me." I reached out and took the box from her hands. Looking inside, my heart did a gentle, familiar aching beat. Resting at the top was a thick, leather-bound photo album filled with pictures of Gregory from the summer of 1999, photos of my boy catching bluegills at the lake, pictures of him proudly holding his middle school science trophy, and candid snapshots of Margaret laughing on this very porch while serving us lemonade. Beneath the albums were several handwritten recipe cards in Margaret's neat cursive script, along with Gregory's wooden childhood keepsake box. These were the exact personal treasures Sienna had dismissively categorized as outdated museum clutter during her initial frenzy to renovate the house. Yet here she was, standing on my porch in the cold, holding them out to me like an offering of peace. "Thank you, Sienna," I said quietly, setting the box down safely on the small wooden bench beside the entryway. "I appreciate you bringing these to me." She didn't turn around to leave right away. She stood on the brick steps, wrapping her arms tightly around her waist, looking past my shoulder into the warm, sunlit living room behind me. She looked at the hand-laid river rock fireplace that she had planned to sledgehammer flat, the solid oak floorboards she had threatened to tear out, and the quiet dignity of a home that had survived every storm thrown against its walls. Tears began to gather in her eyes, welling up and spilling over her cheeks in silent, burning tracks. She bit her lower lip, trying desperately to hold back her sobs. But the emotional dam broke completely. "Arthur," she choked out, her voice cracking with a raw, unbearable pain that resonated across the quiet driveway. "I have to ask you. I haven't been able to sleep for nights thinking about this. If I had just stopped, if I had treated you with respect from the very beginning, if I hadn't come into your home calling you a burden and trying to throw you out, would things have ended differently for me?" I looked at my daughter-in-law, standing on the threshold of the home I had built with my bare hands 35 years ago. I thought about the cold afternoon of Gregory's funeral when she pointed her finger in my face and told me to stop crying and pack my bags. I thought about the shattered glass of Margaret's picture frame lying in the kitchen trash can. And I thought about the 35 years I spent auditing numbers, verifying deeds, and learning that human character is the only currency that never inflates or devalues. "Sienna," I said, my voice dropping into a gentle, unbreakable cadence that carried the full weight of a lifetime's wisdom. "Respect is not a bargaining chip you pull out of your pocket after you realize you've lost the game. It isn't something you negotiate when you find out the old man you tried to crush actually holds the keys to the kingdom. Respect is the foundation. It is the absolute bedrock of human decency." She pressed her hand over her mouth, letting out a broken, shuddering sob as she listened. "If you had walked through that door with humility and love," I continued softly, "I would have carried you through your grief. I would have used the Vance family trust to pay your rent, cover your living expenses, protect your real estate career, and ensure that my dead son's widow never knew a single day of financial terror. I was ready to nourish you, Sienna. I was ready to lift you up and shield you from the world. But instead, you looked at my humble clothes, my old car, and my quiet grief, and you chose to step on my neck to make yourself feel tall." Sienna squeezed her eyes shut, nodding her head slowly in devastating comprehension. The brutal truth of my words didn't crush her with anger. It enlightened her with absolute clarity. She realized that she hadn't been defeated by a ruthless enemy or a cunning legal trap. She had been defeated by her own arrogance. She had traded a lifetime of unconditional family protection, immense wealth, and genuine love for 30 days of fake authority and a pile of worthless pride. "I'm sorry, Arthur," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves on the lawn. "I am so sorry. For everything." "I forgive you, Sienna," I replied. And for the first time in 2 months, I felt the absolute, unvarnished truth of those words in my soul. "I forgive you for your ignorance, and I forgive you for your cruelty. But forgiveness does not mean returning the keys to a house you tried to burn down. Your path lies somewhere else now. Go build a life on real ground this time." She looked up at me one last time, wiped the tears from her face with the back of her sleeve, and offered a faint, tragic nod of respect. "Goodbye, Arthur. Goodbye, Sienna." I watched her walk down the stone path, step into the passenger side of the rented moving truck, and pull the heavy door shut. The engine turned over with a low rumble, the tires backed slowly out of my driveway, and the truck disappeared down Maple Street, vanishing into the quiet suburbia of Naperville. I stood on the porch for a long moment, taking a deep, clean breath of the crisp autumn air. The noise was gone, the threats were gone. The lawyers, the contractors, the fake friends, and the predatory greed had all evaporated into the crisp afternoon wind. I picked up the cardboard box containing Margaret's recipes and Gregory's childhood albums, walked back inside, and closed the heavy wooden door behind me. The lock clicked shut with a solid, satisfying sound, a sound that echoed through a house that was once again safe, secure, and entirely whole. That evening, as the golden twilight faded into a deep, starlit night over Illinois, I sat in my favorite leather armchair in the living room. A warm, golden fire crackled softly in the hand-laid river rock fireplace, the very stones my 12-year-old boy and I had pulled from the riverbed 35 years ago. On the side table beside me rested a framed photograph of Margaret, her bright, beautiful smile glowing under the soft lamplight, alongside a fresh photo of Gregory as a young man, standing proudly in front of this very home. For 2 long months, I had carried a suffocating weight in my chest. I had grieved my son, I had mourned my wife, and I had endured the bitter, stinging humiliation of being called a penniless burden in my own home. But sitting there in the quiet warmth of my living room, listening to the gentle crackle of the wood, and feeling the solid, unyielding strength of the floorboards beneath my feet, a deep, profound sense of peace settled over my soul. I hadn't won a war through hatred, violence, or vengeful shouting. I had simply stood firm on the truth. You see, in a world that constantly tells you to be loud, to drive flashy cars, to wear expensive labels, and to shout over everyone else in the room just to prove your worth, people often forget the immense, terrifying power of quiet dignity. Many people will watch a man live simply, keep his mouth shut, and endure disrespect without flinching. And they will make the fatal mistake of assuming he is weak. They will mistake his humility for poverty, his patience for helplessness, and his silence for surrender. What they fail to understand is that the silence of an experienced, battle-tested man is not a sign of weakness. It is simply the quiet, deliberate choice to wait for the exact right moment, to let the truth speak for itself. Sienna learned the most expensive lesson of her life on these floorboards. Respect is not something you inherit when someone dies. It is not something you demand because you wear a designer suit or hold a real estate license. Respect is an absolute foundation. It must be earned, cultivated, and given freely through character, honor, and basic human decency. And when you choose to treat people like trash simply because you think they lack the power to fight back, you are simply building your future on a pile of shifting sand. My wife is at peace. My son's memory has been restored to honor. My home is safe, my trust is secure, and my life is once again my own. The legacy I leave behind will not be measured by how loud I shouted or how much real estate I controlled, but by the quiet strength I showed when everything I loved was placed on the line. Thank you for listening to tonight's story on Dad's Ultimate Payback. If Arthur Vance's journey of silent strength, unyielding justice, and the ultimate defense of family honor resonated with you tonight, please take a quick second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more powerful, real-life stories, and drop a comment down below. Have you ever been underestimated, looked down upon, or treated like a burden simply because you chose to live quietly and humbly? Share your story with our community in the comments section. We read every single one. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that quiet strength always wins in the end. Until next time, stay strong, keep your boundaries firm, and remember that real power never needs to shout. I'll see you all in the very next story.